Hello, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well. Today, we're going to learn about monopoly. Monopoly is basically a condition where one firm provides all the goods for the market. So, we don't have any competition when it comes to a monopoly. So, a monopolist does not have any direct competitors. So, it's basically one firm providing to the whole market. So, there are some examples that we have of monopolies. There's the electricity company. So we have basically we buy electricity for a town or for a state. It's basically from one electricity company that we get all our power. Water companies like that. If you think about maybe from the government's perspective, like if I want to drive a car, I need a license. So only DMV will provide you with a driver's license. So they have a monopoly for that. There's also other monopolies that happens coincidentally. So it could be like I'll put them in parentheses because they're monopolies for a time being. Let's say maybe the one restaurant in a small town. So they don't really have much competition because that's the only restaurant available, and people may just go there on a daily or weekly basis for food and enjoyment. And then there are others too that we have. Another one would be my cable company. If I get cable, it is probably from a certain number of cable company or cable providers. Now, if I go to satellite, there are a little more options available. But if it's a cable company, then there's only one provider in a town or in a city or in a region. Now, the question is, why are these monopolies? Why don't we have five electric companies serving a town? So there are some reasons why we have monopolies, why monopolies arise. So some of the reasons are, so one is it is just cheaper to provide, or for one firm to provide for the whole market than having competing firms. So imagine like let's think about an electric company. So we have maybe let's say if we have 10 electric companies in a large town or in a large city, then what would happen is let's say I have 10 companies to choose from, then I would need basically 10 different infrastructure for all those 10 electric companies to provide electricity in every building in the city so that I can choose relatively easily between one company and another. Now that would just increase the cost of providing electricity. So it may be just easier for one company to lay down the infrastructure and provide electricity to all the buildings in the city. So it may be just cost efficient for, in certain cases, let's say for electricity, for water, for cable TV, to have one company to provide for the whole city. It may be that one company may own a very important resource. So they are the only ones providing. And this could be true like in many countries, the state-run company owns all the oil fields. So in that case, they are the only ones selling oil to the people. Or it could be that instead of the state-run company, it could be a private company. One private company basically owns all the oil fields in that country, and they are providing the gasoline to every single individual in that country. It could also be that the government gives exclusive rights for a company to own or produce a good. So with this, we come to maybe the government gives a company an exclusive right to sell a product. So in America, in many states, you cannot buy alcohol from any store. There's only a few certain licensed stores where you can buy alcohol. So the government gave those companies exclusive right to sell that product. No other, if someone else sells it, then that company may be prosecuted by the government. It could also be that the government issues patents and copyrights to sellers. So a patent is where when I create a product, basically since I invented it, the government gives me an exclusive right to produce that product for a set number of years. It could be 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. And after that, it's available for everyone to produce. So this is more patents. Very relevant or important example of patents are like drugs or medicines. So it takes years to develop a drug. So once the drug is released in the market, the pharmaceutical companies wants to have a certain exclusive right to produce that drug to the market for a certain number of years. And after those years elapse, that's when the drugs are available for any company to produce. Copyrights are mainly for like authors. So if somebody writes a book, they have a certain number of years of like exclusive right over that book. So for example, you can quote Shakespeare because Shakespeare wrote his books a long time ago and the copyrights have expired. But if you want to use someone else's work, a recent author's work, for monetary gain, then you cannot do that. You have to pay that author a certain percentage of your fees. So it could be that the government gives rights and exclusive rights to companies or to individuals for producing or for selling a certain good. So in this case, this is where monopolies come up. And again, in economics, we would like competition to exist. Competition is good. The more the competition, the better. So monopolies are basically anti-competition. They don't have any direct competitors. So monopolies are a source of market failure. So they are a type of market failure. But in some cases, they are needed because, if it's something like electricity or water, then we cannot, it just doesn't make sense for 5 or 10 companies or competitors to provide it for one city. But in some cases where you are giving a license to exclusively, let's say, sell a product, then there are some gray areas as to whether, that kind of market structure is good for us or not. So now, in our case, how do we find what quantity or price should a monopolist charge? Now, there was a very important cartoon once or a show or an episode in The Simpsons once that showed that Mr. Burns, who owned the electric power plant, blocked the sun and was going to charge lots of money for people to use electricity 24/7. Now, that actually is not quite correct because there is a demand curve for the products that the monopolist is producing, and that demand curve basically dictates what kind of price they could charge. So based on the preference of the people, the demand curve is created. So if I charge a very high price, if people can't buy it, then nobody's going to buy your product. So then I need to lower the price until I have a certain balance of amount being sold and profits earned. So just like before, when we talked about imperfect competitions, there are some steps to find the profit of or loss even, of a monopolist. So the first step is find a point where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Now, if you need to review what marginal revenue and marginal cost is, I have a video on cost and on marginal revenue, which is covered in Perfectly Competitive Markets. So please view those before you come back. And then after I find that, I find P star and Q star, where MR, marginal revenue, equals MC. And then I find ATC star, the average total cost curve, where MR equals MC. And then finally, I calculate profit, which equals to P minus ATC times Q. Now we're going to draw a graph and see what it is. But before we do that, let's review marginal revenue again, because the marginal revenue curve is slightly different when it comes to a monopolist than when we saw it in a perfectly competitive market. So here, just a quick definition of what is a marginal revenue. This is the increase in total revenue when I produce one additional unit of output. So the formula was marginal revenue equals to change in total revenue divided by change in quantity. Now, since the monopolist is the only player in the market, the only seller in the market, So the demand curve of the market is the demand curve seen by the monopolist. So the monopolist just sees the whole demand curve in this market, in this city, or in this region, and that is the demand curve that they face. So in our case then, if we look at the demand curve of a monopolist, we know that the demand curve is going to be, this is the market's demand curve of the market. Since the monopolist is the only seller in the market, so that means that this is the demand curve that also the monopolist looks at. Now, in this case, the demand curve is downward sloping. So now there's one thing that we have to look into. Like, if I sell my product at a certain price, let's say at $10, then my quantity that I sell is 200. So I sell 200 units at $10 each. Now, if I want to sell more units, let's say I lower my price to $5, then I can sell more units, let's say 500 units. Now, to sell each of those 500 units, so to sell those 500 units, I need to sell each of them at $5 each. So here the law of demand holds. If I want to sell more, then I need to lower the price all units. Okay, so I need to lower the price of every unit from $10 down to $5 if I want to sell 500 units. So in that case, if I look at my marginal cost curve, marginal revenue curve, it will be slightly different than what we have done in when we drew it with perfect competition. So let us create a marginal revenue curve. So let's say we have my price and my quantity. Then I have total revenue and marginal revenue. So let's say in our case, my price was, and then if I lower the price to 15, let's say I sell more units. So I sell 1,500 units. And then if I lower the price to 10, it goes up to 2,200 units. And then if I lower it to 5, it goes to 2,700 units. So as we can see from here, as price goes up, my quantity goes down, which is basically following the law of demand. So now in this case, if I want to find my total revenue, it will be price times quantity, which is when price is 20, my total revenue is 20,000. Then it is 15 times 1,500, which is 22,500. 10 times 2,200, which is 22,000. And then 5 times 2,700, which is 13,500. So now if I want to find my marginal revenue, so for the first unit, we don't really have a marginal revenue because we need to find the change. So in the second unit, my change in marginal revenue is going to be 22,500, which is the change in the numerator is change in total revenue, which is minus 20,000, divided by 1,500 minus 1,000. So that comes out to be $5. Okay, and then for the second unit, or if I go from price 15 to 10, my change in marginal revenue would be, well, the numerator is 22,000 minus 22,500 divided by 2,200 minus 1,500, which comes up to be 0.71. And then finally, if I find that one, which is 13,500 minus 22,000 divided by 2,700 minus 2,200 equals, which is negative 17. So as you can see, marginal revenue keeps on falling. So it's a declining number. And marginal revenue, the definition is telling me that giving me the same idea. If I produce 1,500 units at $15, if I want to produce one additional unit, I earn $5 additional. So if I were to draw marginal revenue with my demand curve, now it would not be a straight line that we saw in perfectly competitive markets. This would now, as we see, as we increase more, as we produce more, we actually have a falling marginal revenue. If I were to draw this price and quantity, if this is my demand curve, my marginal revenue curve would be something like that. And then my marginal cost curve remains the same. It's like this, which is basically the supply curve. And then also we need something called the average cost curve, which gives me helps me find out what is the profit or loss. So in this case, we have to find out what is the point where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So let me copy this down. We will need this. So my first step is, what is the point where marginal revenue equals marginal cost? So I look at my marginal revenue, which is this line, and my marginal cost, and they intersect at this point. So this is the quantity. Now, sometimes what students will do is they'll look at marginal revenue and marginal cost, and they'll look at point A, and they'll think this is the point where profit is maximized, but that's not true. This should not be looked into. This is the quantity. Now, what is the quantity where MR equals MC, which is here? Now, what is the price? Again, the price is from the demand curve, not from the marginal revenue curve. So again, a lot of times students will go down here and they'll say, this is the price, but this is actually wrong. This is not right. So in that case, we have to go to the demand curve to find what my price is. So I have to go all the way up to the demand curve and then find what my price is. So, which is P star down here. And then finally, to find ATC star, I again go up to the ATC star to find what is my quantity, or what is the price average total cost for quantity Q star. And then I calculate the profit. I just plug in all the values in and find it. Let's use some numbers. Let's say Q star and P star and ATC star. Let's say Q star is 100, P star is 30, and ATC star is 20. So then my profit would be 30 minus 20 times 100, which is $1,000. So my profit is going to be this region. Now, monopolists can also earn losses. So if the ATC curve is way above the demand curve, so if we look at maybe something like this, so we have our price and quantity. This is the demand curve. This is marginal cost. This is marginal revenue. But if my ATC is maybe up here, then the first point where, what is the point where MR equals MC? So I go, if this is my MC curve, marginal cost, this is my marginal revenue. I look at this point is where MR equals MC. So this is Q star. Then I find my Q star. Let's say Q star is 200. And to find the price, I have to go all the way up to the demand curve, which is this curve, and go to here, which is going to be, let's say 40. And let's say my P star is 40. Then I find ATC star at MR equals MC. So I go all the way up to ATC star, which is up here, and I find that my cost is 60. So ATC star is 60. So then my profit, which is denoted by pi, is going to be price 40 minus 60 times 200, which is going to be negative $4,000. So then this is going to be the loss that I earn. So MR equals MC is where we find that. The difference between, if you are comparing with perfectly competitive firms and the monopolist, in perfectly competitive markets, the marginal revenue was a flat line. So let's draw those two curves here. So let's say we have, so let's say this is this side is perfectly competitive, competition. This is monopoly, price and quantity, price and quantity. Perfect competition did not have a demand curve. We had a marginal revenue curve like this. But in monopoly, there was a demand curve of the market, and the marginal revenue curve was downward, shaped like that. So we have a very similar marginal cost curve. So marginal cost curve goes like that. And we also have an ATC curve, which was similar shaped. Now we did the same thing to find our profit. We looked at the point where MR equals MC. So the point where MR equals MC was this point, the blue point right here, and this was going to be my Q star, and this is my P star. Since there was no demand curve, and marginal revenue curve was a straight line, we just went straight here to find the price. For a monopoly, MR equals MC is again where, marginal revenue intersects marginal cost curve, which is down here. But now we go up to the demand curve to find the price. ATC is again at Q star, which we find at Q star. So which is ATC star. Again, from Q star, we go all the way up to ATC to find our ATC star. And then we calculate the profit the same way. So the profit is going to be P star minus ATC star times Q star. Same with monopoly, P star minus ATC star times Q star. So again, monopolist may remain as a monopoly for a while, but also may lose its monopoly status. Think about the railroads. In the early 1900s, only a few railway companies controlled the rail network in America. So you had one rail company just having trains all across the southeast of US, one rail company having rail tracks all across the northeast of US. But then when road network and airlines started to develop, that's when that monopoly disappeared. So it's not necessarily that the monopolist will live forever. It could die eventually. Now, a couple of things that we can see between a monopoly and perfect competition. One is price will be lower for a perfect competition. Price will be higher for a monopoly. Now, this is kind of intuitive. There's so many firms, they're each trying to outcompete the other. And, so that's why the market price is lower for a perfect competition. In a monopoly, there's just one firm. And that firm wants to maximize profit, so they can charge a much higher price. But they're also, basically, they are dictated by the demand and marginal cost curve of their firm. But the benefit here is, in perfect competition, I have to divide my market across thousands of other sellers. Monopoly does not have to, so they can charge a much higher price for their product. And then, usually profit is higher in a monopolist because, you don't have to worry about profit falling to zero economic profit unless the market kind of disappears. So your profits are pretty set for all the rest of your life. Now, monopolists are sometimes desired, like, if it's one firm producing for the whole market, like an electric company. But sometimes the government actually will try to break down monopolies. If a firm gets too big, the government may put in restrictions. So governments may break monopolies to ensure more competition and better products or services. So this happened before in America. There were certain companies like JP Morgan Bank was a huge bank, and the government came in and broke that into smaller banks so that they could compete against each other. Standard Oil was one large oil company that was broken down into smaller oil companies so that more competition would be there in the market. So this is how monopolists earn their profit, and we use this graph. Hopefully this was beneficial. If you have any other questions, feel free to contact me, and I'll see you at a later date. Goodbye.